The Pilgrim of 1928 accompanied Captain Sir George Hubert Wilkins to a meeting of the Los Angeles Breakfast Club, where Sir Hubert was guest of honor. And he later visited with the famous Australian explorer at his quarters in Hollywood's Hotel Roosevelt, where the salient features of physical continuity were illustrated with a miniature globe symbol that permitted the quadrants of the globe to be detached. Needless to relate, greatest stress was laid on the feature of terrestrial land extent. Sir Hubert was fully informed of the unknown and endless land extending beyond the South Pole point, where his expedition was directed. That conference was of somewhat different nature from some others of this chronicle, for the modern Columbus was being heard by one who was also a dreamer as well as a courageous performer in the world of established reality. Hence, the archaic of theory was not permitted to dominate the conference. It became evident that the explorer was not risking his precious life at the forbidding South Pole merely for the purpose of measuring wind velocity and to gauge the directional activity of ice flows. Sir Hubert seemed wholeheartedly to share the conviction that the South Pole was by no means the southern end of the Earth. His statement afforded eloquent testimony that he was possessed of a powerful urge to go beyond all restrictions of theory and the pioneering spirit of a true explorer. You know, before leaving England I was advised that if I succeeded in penetration beyond the South Pole point I would be drawn to another planet by the suction of its movement. That provided appropriate amusement, in view of the perceptional portrait then being exhibited. Yet they who were responsible for such expression were not to be censured. The Copernican concept, holding the universe to be comprised of isolated globular bodies, permits no other conclusion than that space would be encountered beyond the pole points of theory. Sir Hubert was visibly impressed by the prospects presented, and he gave firm assurance that he would continue beyond the traditional mathematical end of the Earth when he said, "Giannini, if you will show me the route to the land you claim exists beyond the South Pole, I will continue onto it in spite of all obstacles." The International News Service at Los Angeles received copy of information designating the route requested by Sir Hubert. And history records his memorable discovery of land beyond the South Pole on December 12, 1928. The manner in which the theorists may have thereafter misinterpreted the value of that land has very little meaning for this work, dealing with cosmic reality and diametrically opposed to the conjectures of theorists. However, it seems fitting to here reiterate that man's habitual fear of the unknown permits gross misinterpretation of values demanding a change of concept. Man hates to forsake the old and known course. Though newly discovered facts establish that the cherished old of theory has no application to a world of reality, only with the greatest reluctance is the old relinquished. Accordingly, there was early evidence that such previously unknown land beyond the South Pole was being subjected to a mathematical disguise, which was intended to hold intact and preserve the 400-year-old conjecture. The theory was not modified to fit the fact of land extent, but the land extent was discounted to make it fit the theory. The reason and purpose for that southern land extension, linking our Earth with the universe about us, was obscured with another patch of mathematical abstracts generously applied by the theorists. They served only to make glaringly ridiculous an issue which was then confused out of reason's bounds. Therefore, it is still of timely value to quote another fearless dealer in reality who was heard immediately after Sir Hubert's memorable land discovery of December 12, 1928. The masterful arbiter of fact was the then famous Russian explorer Dombrava, who announced the sensational discovery of land beyond the South Pole by Captain Sir George Hubert Wilkins on December 12, 1928. Demands that science change the concept it has held for the past 400 years concerning the southern contour of our Earth. Dombrava, in common with Sir Hubert and a very select group of that time, was unafraid of the space phantom projected by theorists, and, as his words expressed, he had no patience for the fearful mathematical patchwork to provide a feeble temporary, but grossly contradictory, explanation of that previously unknown land's existence. Although the extent of that southern land continuity was no penetrated, its estimated length of 5,000 miles indicated endless land continuity if there had been proper interpretation of the land's existence. And though the dreamer who charted the course to that land was available as the most competent interpreter, his unmistaken interpretation of values was ignored. Thus, no attempt was made to influence a change of popular concept as dictated by the reality then disclosed. For the reality of that land beyond the South Pole holds eloquent refutation of the Copernican theory's mathematical limitations of the Earth. It was manifest that figures and limitations of theory dominated as arbiters of cosmic reality, inasmuch as the land's existence and extent did not conform to the established figurative pattern, which contributed to popular misconception. Its reality had to be denied. It is easy to grant to a dreamer, who had toiled to have proof established, the right to believe that the proof would actuate questioning of the archaic theory and concept. Perhaps there was such questioning, unknown to him. How much underlying and unexpressed interest that land beyond the South Pole may have aroused can only be conjectured. But it is certain that the expressions of that time could not be considered a token of spirited awakening by arbiters of the cosmic pattern. However, the sensational research and explorative enterprise from 1928 until 1956, undertaken almost exclusively by the U.S. Navy's Technical Division, attests to a very definite and surprisingly active interest to determine the facts. Yet the reluctance to express interest openly prevailed until a very recent day. In a final analysis, it may be willed that organized science, as a medium through which discovered values are interpreted, must adhere to a more rigid procedure than he whose unnatural perception enables him to see beyond the acceptable deductive pattern. He who surpasses the pattern owes allegiance only to his soul. It was such quality which permitted discovery of values beyond the ordered pattern. Such being the case, adequate allowances should be made by both sides so that better understanding of the acquisition of values may be had. The lesson should by now be learned that the new and the revolutionary cannot be found in orderly deductive pursuits. Where the extraordinary perceptionist, the inventor, the explorer, or even the creative artist, may and must jump headlong without waiting for the sanction and benediction of tradition's establishments, he must have patience to bide his time until orderly science explores to its own satisfaction the merit of extraordinary findings in whatever field of research, invention, or discovery. On the other hand, it behooves established science to withhold too ready condemnation of the new and the revolutionary until proper investigation has been made of the new presentation, of whatever nature. There is no excuse for organized science to become impatient. Accordingly, in the overall word portrait of perceptional values here, it appears to be timely to elaborate upon pertinent features of the fallacious globe-Earth concept, particularly in relation to the so-called poles. Some of it may be repetitious. If so, repetition is in order and needs no further apology. This is not a theme so oft repeated of love, hatred, or the many expressions of other human emotion and behavior. This is an original work which has never been published. Hence it is necessary at times to repeat the most important and least understood features for the purpose of clarity. According to the established globe-Earth symbol, it must be assumed that any progress beyond the northern or southern geographic centers designated by the poles would demand a return toward the north temperate zone or the south temperate zone. The symbol makes such return on the other side a physical necessity. Otherwise, and as the Londoners counseled Sir Hubert Wilkins, one would experience a sharp takeoff into space. The misconception of such return from the other side of the globe symbol is so firmly fixed that popular belief holds that the Earth has in fact been circumnavigated north and south on numerous occasions. The belief has persisted despite the fact that there has never been a latitudinal circumnavigation of the terrestrial area. There has been none because there can be none. It may be claimed that Admiral Peary, Raoul Amundsen, and other explorers went over the pole. However, it must also be known that such over the pole accounts have mistakenly represented the term. Its realistic purpose was to show only that explorers did in fact reach the true pole points. To the poles with a turnabout for return to starting points is possible of accomplishment. But movement to either pole and over the pole with return to starting point, without turning around, never was and never can be accomplished. It should be realized that explorers of the past did, in certain instances, reach the pole points. But it should also be realized that they very definitely did not go beyond either pole and return to their starting point from the opposite side, as popular misconception has held. To and over the pole point means only movement to and over the assumed mathematical end of the globe symbol, which represents no more than supposed terrestrial extent, whereas over the pole with continuing movement north from the North Pole or south from the South Pole with return to other known areas of the Earth is impossible. When one goes beyond the poles, one is moving, as the colloquial aptly describes, out of this world. One then continues to move over land extending beyond the Earth. That land beyond is not on either side of the Earth. That was conjectured by Mr. Copernicus. Such a land factor, strange as it may seem to many, is now firmly established by U.S. naval exploration beyond the poles. It would be most fanciful to contend that any unknown land existed beyond the pole points, if one believed that the phrase, over the pole, really means that explorers of the past went over the pole points from one side to the other side of a supposedly isolated globe, Earth. Under such circumstances there could be no beyond other than the space originally conjectured. But such performance from one side to the other side of an isolated globe, Earth, is an aspect of popular misconception.
Figure 3. The infinite sky enveloping the universe, showing the inescapable illusions. This is not intended to show distance from the terrestrial to the celestial. It cannot be drawn to scale. But it does indicate what the nightly vibe of our terrestrial sky must be for our celestial cousins. Our luminous outer sky, deceptively appearing as millions of rounded and isolated bodies, would present to the Martian and all other inhabitants of the universe the identical so-called heavens above, which we see as their luminous and deceptively isolated sky areas. Since up is always relative, our celestial cousins look up, or out, through their inner blue sky, as we do through ours, and behold the same nightly star pattern that we witness. Contrary to popular misconception based on the illusory, shooting up or out from any location on the terrestrial and the celestial would take the hapless explorers away from the universe structure and project him into infinite space. Place your thumb on the illustration's Stratosphere section, then draw it toward you. That will describe where the space explorer would go if he did not land back on some land area of the terrestrial. He would be completely lost in space wherein the universe was constructed, or he would be projected upon some terrestrial area remote from the point of flight origin. Thus the heralded spaceships would be precisely that and nothing else. Any spaceship launched, and there is no doubt that it could be launched, would either be lost in space infinite or be returned to some area of the Earth. Increase of speed and power would hasten the development whereby it would become lost outside the universe whole. Such is the inevitable destiny for spaceships. The universe is so ordered that power increase to overcome the arc of flight would precipitate the spaceship away from the universe. On the other hand, insufficient power would restrict the spaceship to the movement of all projectiles, and it would have to conform to the arc of flight, which would return it to some land area of the terrestrial. That flight principle, always demanding consideration in the firing of our most powerful naval weapons, hold application to the U.S. Navy's superpowered rockets. Their arc and drift is increased with every increase of altitude. Continuing the study of the illustration for better understanding of the terrestrial heavens above, imagine that the luminous terrestrial sky curves each cover a land area 100 miles in length and width. Then cover the entire terrestrial lands with 100-mile sky disks. That will give some idea of the countless luminous rounded and isolated bodies are connected and continuous outer sky presence to celestial observation. The results of observation from the celestial would compare with results of our observation from the terrestrial. The magnitude of the terrestrial heavenly bodies detected would depend in part on the power of the detecting lenses.
The 1928 polar expeditions of Captain Sir George Herbert Wilkins and Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd, U.S.N., did penetrate beyond the South Pole point in a southerly direction and discovered that land extended at least 5,000 miles beyond the original mathematized southern end of the Earth. Incidentally, that estimated 5,000-mile extent represents the greatest estimate possible through triangulation, and there is no other means for estimating. Modern expeditions have penetrated into that 5,000-mile land extent, but its end has not yet been reached. When the end of the estimate is reached, another similar estimate will be made. Such estimating, and penetration to the limit of the estimate, can continue ad infinitum. There is no physical end to the Earth, north or south. That 1928 primary estimate indicated land that continues due south from and beyond what had been considered an isolated globe, Earth. That land extent cannot be shown by the popular globe, Earth symbol. It is beyond the bounds of that symbol of theory. But it can be visualized by simply adding another globe symbol on top of the South Pole point. The United States and other governments now have land bases on land which cannot be shown by the globe symbol of 1543. That land beyond the South Pole was seen through extrasensory perception before human eyes had beheld it and before any mind had deduced its existence. And its reality belatedly established the inadequacy of the 400-year-old conjecture of Earth ends and the Earth's relation to the universe about us. The difficulty of average concept to grasp the fact of such physical continuity of the terrestrial with the celestial has resulted from the fixation that the classroom sphere, depicting the Earth, is a proved entity of the universe. Such was never the case. It was only a symbol of unproved theory. The theory of 1543 is extremely abstract. It was evolved by the most abstract science, and its framework, as described here, was based on the inescapable error of lens functioning. No amount of observation, and no amount of increased lens power for magnification of luminous celestial areas, can overcome the illusions developed from such lens error. Therefore, in the light of values now established beyond the pole points, one may rightfully question how any physical attempt could have been made to verify the mathematized Earth ends when the theory containing such ends was developed. At the time, and until very recent years, there existed no physical means whereby progress could be made beyond the assumed ends for determination that such points were not the ends. A mathematical designation of Earth ends north and south was sufficient for the time of theory. But one should be alert to differentiate between figurative and realistic values of the universe. By no means is the figure interchangeable with the fact. A famous physicist once referred to that differentiation as follows: the world of the mathematician is peopled by all sorts of entities that never did, or never could, exist on land or sea, or in the universe about us. The apt reference is to the astro-mathematician, whose mathematics ordain a universe opposed to creative reality. With understanding that the ancient attempt to interpret the Earth's north and south extent was purely mathematical, it becomes reasonable to question the ends designated by mathematics. Then one can concede the prospect of land and water was continuing beyond the poles. With realization of modern discovery, which affirms the existence of land beyond, it becomes reasonable to question that land's purpose and where it leads. Then, with acquisition of the observational principles that are firmly established by the sciences, it will not seem out of place to apply such principles in telescopic observation of the universe about us. The relative relationship of up is by no means an innovation by this writer. It has always been known, in spite of the fact that the understanding has not always been afforded practical application. Up is always relative to the position we hold anywhere in the universe structure. When we stand on the land up there, this terrestrial land we have left behind will have to appear to be up to our observation from a celestial area. The fly standing on the ceiling or the floor is as much up from either position. Nor is the fly upside down when standing on the ceiling. Our concept of values may consider the fly on the ceiling to be upside down, but it can in no way affect the fly's position. The fly stands as firmly on the ceiling as on the floor. Sitting in the nose of a rocket that is gliding through the stratosphere at an altitude of 500 miles from the Earth's surface, we will have lost sight of where we entered the dark stratosphere. Then, wherever we look we will observe the luminous points astronomically designated. Now, this is the all-important feature very recently proved. As we look toward the sky area covering the land surface we departed from, there will be seen the same luminous points that envelop us from every angle of observation. Then, as altitude is increased, the lights of the celestial will bear no greater relation of up than the lights of the terrestrial sky areas. And as the universal skylight will not be arranged in a direct course over and under our rocket, but will appear at every angle, up will be everywhere to our observation. Up is in fact everywhere. The so-called heavens above are everywhere. The problem of rationalizing endless land extending beyond pole points, with the orthodox globe Earth concept, precluding any possibility of such land, is conveniently met in the following manner. Grant the imaginary mathematical poles the physical reality of popular misconception. Let them remain as ends for the Earth of 1543. Continue the pole points of 1543 to the distance beyond that has to date been penetrated. Mark such points the new South Pole and new North Pole. Then repeat the performance with every exploratory advancement beyond the new pole points. As the 1928 explorers beyond the South Pole estimated a land extent of 5,000 miles out of bounds of the Copernican globe, Earth, the extreme limit of that estimate must be considered our new South Pole, when it has been reached. When future expeditions arrive at that new South Pole 5,000 miles beyond the original South Pole, they will estimate another 5,000 miles beyond the new South Pole. That pole-moving procedure will continue as long as men inhabit the Earth and answer the urge to explore such land highways extending beyond both pole points. and as they continue to penetrate the northern and southern land extensions of the traditional Earth area, they will establish that penetration is being accomplished into celestial areas which, from our present positions on terrestrial level, must appear to be up or out. One may for the present continue to retain the concept of Earth isolation if it is beyond one's ability to relinquish it. The natural course of events will conveniently modify yesteryear's concept without knowledge of the individual. Truth has a very subtle way of entering where it is not wanted. As each successive exploit of man along the northern and southern land highways unifying the terrestrial and the celestial bears confirmation that the Earth is not isolated, the dominant misconception will be dispelled. Such discernment will not come like a sharp hypodermic injection. It will develop like the slow but certain change in growth of body tissue. Then will the poles of yesteryear's understanding be stripped of their restrictive domination. It must become most obvious that there are no northern or southern limits to the Earth after explorers have penetrated 10, 20, and 50,000 miles beyond the originally assumed ends. And the continuing land being penetrated must therefore represent the areas of the celestial. After such extensive penetration, the question would naturally arise, what else can it possibly represent? Without the stimulus of this perceptional portrait of cosmic values, there has been periodic effort to penetrate the immediate Antarctic continent this side of the South Pole since the year 1739. However, early explorers were compelled to retrace their course after reaching various points of the vast Antarctic plateau. They were denied access to the pole point because of lack of essential mechanical equipment now at hand. And since they could not reach the pole, they certainly could not have hoped to penetrate beyond the pole. The general misunderstanding of southern polar conditions may be realized from the following descriptive account of the Antarctic continent, which bars the course to and beyond the South Pole, a realm of mystery. The pole is located upon a plateau 10,000 feet high in the center of a vast continent of 5 million square miles, 50% larger than the United States. Upon all but 100 square miles of Antarctica lies a cap of thick ice glittering upon high plateaus and lofty mountain ranges which give the continent an average height of 6,500 feet, or twice the height of Asia. In the light of modern knowledge concerning southern polar terrain and that area's width, it becomes important to re-examine the 400-year-old concept as it relates to the final quadrant, south, of a supposed isolated sphere. In harmony with the conceptual value originally expressed, can such vast land area and its mountains be explained? In any attempt to harmonize today's discovered reality with yesterday's theory, one must bear in mind that no stretch of the imagination can transform land and mountains into ice. Recall the elementary provisions of the Copernican theory that, because of the daily and yearly movements of the supposedly isolated globe Earth on its imaginary axis, the two extremes of that inconceivably rapidly moving globe, or sphere, would accomplish the least movement in time and space, and they would receive less of the sun's heat as a result of the mathematically prescribed tilt of the Earth planet as it made daily movement in its assumed orbit to achieve day and night, while making a secondary movement toward and then away from the sun to arrange the seasons we experience. Early interpretation of theory's values held that there would have to be experienced a perceptible tapering of the Earth body from the greatest equatorial width to that of the pole points. However, experience teaches that such condition does not hold. The tapering is imperceptible. It is negative in comparison with the Earth's greatest width. Moreover, in precise conformance to theory, the prescribed movement of theory would demand that the so-called ends be of ice, which is somewhat different from the solid land and mountains found to exist and to be coated with ice. The factor of ice covering for polar areas of the terrestrial results from the position of such areas in relation to the universe whole, and from the distribution of magnetic force throughout the universe whole. The magnetic dispensation does vary throughout terrestrial areas in accordance with the natural laws governing its universal distribution. But the magnetic force of the creation is by no means dependent on misconceived man-made rules of behavior. Man may assume the structure of the universe as he will, and he may ordain a fantasy of movement for the continuous universe structure, which his deduction has dissected into multiple disconnected areas. However, and strange as it may seem to man's egotism, cosmic reality makes no provision for man's hopeful but vacuous deduction. Descriptive material dealing with Antarctica mentions that penguins and whales abound in this previously assumed desolate area of ice and glaciers and eternal darkness, and that the mountains hold a fabulous fortune in coal and ores. Now reconsider the ancient theory, which to account plausibly for the experienced long days, short days, and seasons as the assumed isolated globe Earth prescribed its assumed yearly course toward and away from the sun, made it imperative that the assumed ends of an assumed globe would have to be ice. They could never contain the land and minerals of modern record, and the profusion of animal life known to exist. The awesome decree of the Quran described the northern and southern assumed extremities of an earth then believed to be flat as the lands of eternal darkness. Are they? The unknown is always fearful and forbidding. Hence it must be considered dark. As land, mountains, minerals, and profusion of animal life are found to constitute the Antarctic area this side of the South Pole, land, vegetation, and life are to be found as progress is made beyond the pole and out of terrestrial boundaries. At that particular pole point, and for a distance beyond, are experienced the most intense winds and blizzards, which act as a barrier to progress beyond the earth. Such conditions seem to be an expression of divine will, which demands that terrestrial man be receptive to cosmic values before he is permitted to penetrate the ice barrier between the terrestrial and the celestial. Beyond the barrier will be found a warmer climate, with land and waterways. And it is there that celestial cousins await terrestrial man's arrival. And if one asks how far beyond, it will suffice to record that the distance is negligible, with modern transportation speed. The northern and southern terrestrial extensions have until very recently been denied in the same manner that the eastern and western water extensions were denied prior to the 15th century. Yesteryear's archaic Ptolemaic theory prohibited terrestrial width because the sky seemed to meet the water at the eastern and western horizons. And the globe symbol, also founded on illusion, has restricted movement beyond the globe's assumed ends. The 15th century experience taught that things are not what they seem. We have learned that we need not shoot up or shoot down in movement from one side to the other of an assumed globe Earth. We have learned that we can make such movement without falling over the edge of the Earth. Unfortunately, we have not yet collectively learned that we may move straight ahead from the Earth's assumed ends to reach areas of the universe about us which appear up or out from terrestrial position. The Earth globe symbol would seem to require an up and down movement from Boston to Hong Kong, and vice versa. But experience has taught that movement between such points is on the same physical plane. Regardless of what the globe symbol depicts, it should be understood that the Earth's realistic arrangement in the space of its construction is as if both sides of the Earth were shown as flat surface areas. Please don't get lost. This has nothing whatever to do with the archaic flat Earth concept of the Ptolemaic kings. If one cuts the map surface of the globe symbol from pole to pole, and stretches out both sides of the map, it will show the realistic course of movement from Boston to Hong Kong. There is no movement up or down. But the globe symbol must make it appear that there is. The relation of the entire terrestrial area with the celestial is the same. Up is always relative. And we move straight ahead from assumed terrestrial ends to reach the celestial areas, which are apparently up or out from the terrestrial.
Here we go.